Hi, everyone. Today I'm going to be telling you about how correlations might be ruining your gradient descent. And by that, I'm talking about not just your simulations, but also for some of the principles that we think about governing maybe how brains learn. And that bit I'm going to come back to at the end. To take you on this journey, I'm going to have to talk about a couple of theoretical things, so bear with me. And we're going to start with gradient descent and natural gradients. To make sure we're all on the same page, I'm quickly visualizing gradient descent here. And this should look pretty familiar. It's a very simple loss landscape with a minimum right in the middle. And this loss landscape is in terms of your parameters of your model, such that you've got a model at the red dot at the top somewhere. And quite faithfully, in this case, gradient descent, the gray arrow is pointing your model towards where it would be most optimum. And in a situation like this, gradient descent performs really well, and also in general can perform really well in tasks. However, gradient descent relies on the steepest direction you can take to optimize your model, which sometimes leads it to going on a longer path than it could take, meaning that sometimes, you might have noticed, gradient descent's pretty slow to train. There was a framework put together in the late 90s called natural gradients that tried to overcome this issue. And it effectively said, hey, your gradient descent should be modified based upon the dynamics of your loss landscape, effectively the curvatures, the skews and scales of your loss landscape. And if we take that premise seriously and apply it to exactly the condition I showed you, the orange arrow suddenly points in the direction you'd want to go to directly get to the optimal parameter. And people know this and people talk about this, but I'm going to talk about a part of this, which is about correlations in your data that is often missed out. And I'm going to show you some math, but I'm just going to talk about it in blocks, so don't be afraid. If you take the update that you would apply to a deep neural network, a feed-forward deep neural network, and you look at it from the natural gradients perspective, part of that update is just gradient descent, but it's modulated. On one side, it's modulated by exactly the skews and scales that I was just talking about, things in your loss landscape that are skewing it in various dimensions. But it has another term that people don't talk about, which is, it says also you should unskew and unscale your gradient descent update based upon the correlations in your actual input data. And this is not input data just at the very bottom of a network, but at every single layer of the network. So every single layer of a deep neural network. And you might ask, okay, but you already showed us how gradient descent can be skewed, right? If the loss landscape doesn't look very nice, what is happening if you have data correlations? Well, I can show you that really simply here. For the people at the back, the graph on the left-hand side is the one I already showed you, and I didn't tell you that the data I was using for this simple linear regression kind of loss landscape had no correlations in it. It was sampled randomly from uncorrelated Gaussians. And the one on the right has a specific, distinct correlation matrix. And it doesn't matter how much you sample. It doesn't matter how big you make your data set. In that case, where you have correlations in your data on the right, despite the fact that your loss landscape is really well behaved, you're not going to point at the minimum of your loss. And instead, again, you're going to take a detour. What's actually happening here is that correlations are bringing your parameters into a non-orthonormal basis. And that means your parameters are now interdependent in some way because your data is interdependent. And we can talk about that more. And there are also ways to solve this, which can look a bit like a complex version of batch normalization, can also look a bit like lateral inhibition from computational neuroscience. But the short kind of results part of the story is that backpropagation can get 5 or 10x faster if you remove data correlations at every layer of a network. This can even be shown for ResNet architectures with 101 layers. But on top of that, the part I'm most excited about is that methods that we think might be operational in the brain, approximate methods for gradient descent, that stop working once your data is difficult enough, can suddenly work. And I'm going to show you 2 quick examples here of node perturbation and feedback alignment, though I think this is applicable to many more. The dotted lines here are without any kind of decorrelation, and the solid lines are with a decorrelation mechanism to remove those correlations. And as you can see, it's really striking for feedback alignment. The speed with which it learns is so much faster, orders of magnitude. And this is on CFAR 10, and if we take this to tiny ImageNet, much harder task, suddenly feedback alignment can get to even 100% training accuracy when previously it actually can't learn the task at all. So I guess in conclusion, what I'm trying to say is that correlations are ruining your gradient descent, maybe in your simulations, but also maybe in your brains. Thank you.